The content discussed in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as financial or mortgage advice. Always consult with a licensed professional before making any decisions regarding mortgages or financial matters.
Welcome to the Canadian Mortgage Show. Here are mortgage professionals Alex Pang and Alex Shanks to cut through the BS and educate Canadians on all things mortgages and real estate.
Welcome to another episode of the Canadian Mortgage Show. This is episode 32. We have a special guest today. We have Trenton Poy from Mountain View Insurance. I'm going to just do a quick intro. He's been in the insurance industry since 1986, and he owns Mountain View Insurance Services since 2000. Now, politically, he's joined a political party when he was 14 and has worked in the federal and provincial elections since 84. He's attended numerous political conventions and been involved in the local riding associations as vice president and secretary. He actually ran for the local Abbotsford nomination in 2005. Now, he has great interest in both international and local politics. And this is a great quote. He feels that when you spend 50% of your income on taxes, why would you not want to have a say in how it's spent? I think that's a great quote. Trenton Poy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you for coming here, Trenton. It's super excited to obviously chat with you about more of the political stuff here today. I'm excited to hear more about like what's involved, what you've been doing, and everything.
Yeah, so I mean, tell us a little bit more about like how did you become active in politics? I see, like during our read that you joined when you were 14, but tell us the story and what got you into politics.
I think what it was is when I was 8 and 9, I lived over in Africa, and with living overseas on a foreign aid project, gave me a real interest in history, geography, and then naturally politics. And so I think that interest just parlayed into, I said, just being interested in politically and recognizing how much the world is affected by that, right? So was like a natural one. My parents had opinions, but they weren't involved, so it wasn't like they got me involved. In fact,
That's interesting, Trenton, because I was just going to ask you that if it was your family that was like also, because usually that's what you would think would be the case.
yeah, I mean, no doubt, my dad has lots of opinions there, which is, but he wasn't involved in any political, or my mom wasn't involved in any political party. They just had opinions, but it was just something I said, okay, I want it, and I've found over the years. Being involved, you get a better idea of what's happening in the world and what's happening in your community. But B, you also meet lots of great people over the years. And I said that's I think part of why I'm drawn to it and why I would recommend people get involved, irrespective of which political party, is you find a lot more what's happening in your community and in the world, by extension. But also you meet lots of great people, and it's. People with an interest in their community.
Now tell me, Trenton, like how do you actually get involved with that? And my thoughts here is like obviously the younger generation we're not involved with it, which I think is an issue. So tell us how we could be involved.
Yeah, I got involved with joining a political party. And then, of course, when you join a political party, you get to vote for the leader of the party, or you get to vote for the candidate who runs in the election. And I would say if you do get involved, or what I would recommend for lots of young people, is if they do get involved at the local riding association, get on the board of directors. Most political parties will have 20, 25 people in their riding, be part of the board of directors. And then they actually get to interact with the MP. Usually like you have quarterly or monthly meetings. You have the MP or MLA kind of goes on what's there. And then you can get involved with going to like party conventions. If people are not interested necessarily at a party level, but just get involved with a community group, organization, right? They have a huge amount. Network with people and understand that whenever you join a political party or join a group, you may not agree with 100%, but generally if you agree with the philosophy, right? You're not going to get perfection, but you're going to get kind of, like I said, hopefully a chance to influence how things go.
Coming out of this, your intro read, you said that you ran for the local nomination in 2005. You didn't win, but what made you not want to keep running again? Like, there are a lot of times people run, they lose, but then they've learned and they campaign further down the line. Did you continue with that, or did you just stop after one try?
Like I joined the board. I was on the board of directors of our local riding association beforehand, and I was on the board of directors afterwards. Our current MP just retired this year, so there wasn't a spot open. But also, I think I'm at a different stage of my life. Right now, I'm married. I said, I would have my business then, but probably not as easy to then make that leap. And I think at this stage of my life, I'm happy to be involved at the party level, but not necessarily being an MP or MLA. I said, but that's just my stage, right? Others would obviously, have the ambition there. So, but I ran not expecting to win, but I ran because I had opinions and I wanted to state it and let there be a good debate.
And that's, I mean, the hardest thing that I'll say, Trenton, and maybe you can help me understand it more, is obviously it's hard for us, the people, to have a voice and an opinion. I have some family friends and stuff that their son passed away due to a fentanyl overdose. And I mean, they've been advocating for this in the government for years now. No one's listening to them. So he actually had to try and become an MP to even get people to listen to him. Obviously, now when people ask him questions, there's like, well, what do you think about the zoning and stuff? I mean, he's like, I'm only here because I want this one platform to be listened to. And I mean, that's the hard thing, is like, we have to go through all this stuff for even our voice to get listened.
Yeah. And it's like anything, it takes a lot of effort, right? The trouble is that, just because we want it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? You got to put time and effort, like any worthwhile thing in life. It takes time and effort, right? And it takes persistence. And I would say with your friend, right? I said that's just part of it. And then he'll probably find as he gets more involved, there will be other issues he'll become interested in. A lot of it's also having the opportunity. The trouble is, I find with a lot of people with politics, is they think it's so hard and so uneasy to get involved in that. And it's easier to get involved, I think, but understanding just because I want it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And nor should it be. Like I said, democracy is way better than dictatorships over the end.
Totally. And I think that's the hardest part, as everyone, we want something to happen, but we're instant gratification. We have stuff on our phone and we want it now, but it's like, hey, like something, we can't just enact something instantly. We don't even know what the ramifications would be.
Yeah. And also, like I said, like anything, just because you're an MP or MLA doesn't mean you have unlimited power. Most of the budgets of any province or country is already committed. He says you're not going to stop paying pensions, you're not going to stop paying the interest or health or education. So you're working on areas that you can enact, and it takes time. And that's also understanding that anything in life just takes time, right? But I would say if you just throw up your hands and say you can't do anything, then other people will decide for you. And that's where always is my kind of retort, is that people go, oh, but you can't. But if you don't get involved, then others will. And then you can't complain when they make the decisions that you may or may not agree with.
That's great. You know what? Let's get right into it. This federal election, what do you think the main issues are? Because April 28th is coming pretty soon.
Tariffs and Trump obviously are the biggest issues. I said how that's going to affect the economy. What are we going to do to respond to it? And then I think closely, and it's somewhat tied to that, is the cost of living. People are upset with the huge inflation that we've had over the last little while. The prices, especially housing. How are we going to build enough? What policies are we going to put in to at least stabilize the price? I don't think any government wants the prices to crash.
That's what Alex and I talk about every day.
Yeah.
They're saying they're going to make homes more affordable. Well, the only way they make homes more affordable if prices go down. Yeah. But I mean, that would be political suicide pretty much for any party to say that.
If people think higher housing prices is politically tough, try people underwater. They get very cranky. And I think that's the question: is how do you bring in more supply to meet the demand? So at least the prices are stabilizing there, and that's going to be interesting. And that's where I think all the parties are trying to do different proposals. Which one is going to find that sweet spot that could do a better aspect of that.
Now, what's your thoughts, Trenton? I mean, obviously the parties can say whatever they want of, hey, and I mean, let's use the Liberals. Hey, we're going to build 500,000 homes a year. Alex and I were just talking about this on the last podcast. The most homes Canada's ever built in one year was like 276,000. And that was in I think either 67 or 76. And it's like, and like how I just sometimes find it funny that like, why would we say a number that we know really is not attainable? And I mean, they're also saying we're going to give 35 billion for it. I mean, if they divide that by 500,000 homes, that's only $70,000 a home. So like they come up with these extravagant plans, but it's just like, let's do something that's realistic. Like, let's say, hey, let's try and build 200,000 home for the next 4 years. Boom, we've done that. Then let's increase it.
Yeah, I think the real difficulty is there's very limited that the federal government can do. They can change some of the tax rules. They can change, maybe put in like a MERV program for the multifamily rentals, some of the capital gains, some of the GST, right? But the reality is most of it's going to be at the provincial and by extension the municipal. And I think one of the biggest difficulties we have is that we've imposed too many costs on developing. What is it? They say that 30% of the average new home build in Greater Vancouver area is taxes and fees. And B, I would say the other difficulty we have is that we don't open up enough land. So we've now hit where, like whether it's Metro Toronto or Vancouver with the green belts and the ALR, we are not opening up enough land to increase the supply. And we're trying to build more dense and build up. But the reality is, if our cities are growing at a rapid rate, we are not providing the footprint for that. And I would always say people, and I know I'm going on, is look at the difference between housing prices in Calgary and Edmonton versus Vancouver or Toronto. Calgary and Edmonton, they are expanding, and their housing, what is the average house price there? What, about $750 versus one.
We always say, oh, it's the cost to build, but it's like, hey, you could build a $1 million home in Edmonton. That same home in BC would cost $3 million to build. And it's just, which that means that's our contractors that are inflating cost as well. And obviously it's the development fees. And you're able to do that here because there is a better price tag. And we all know I'd rather live in BC than Alberta. Yeah. And so there is a price tag for that.
Yeah. But I think even part of the week when we look at the housing prices, even in like Greater Vancouver, I was surprised to learn that today we have less single family homes than what we had 10 years ago. So the latest stat I saw is that 10 years ago we had about 302,000 single family homes in Greater Vancouver. We're down to 288. So I always say if you've increased the population, you got less supply, prices are going to go up.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like the Conservatives and the Liberals trying to entice first-time home buyers or the entry-level buyers? Now, the first is Liberals removing GST on new homes up to $1 million for first-time buyers, whereas the Conservatives is no GST on new homes up to 1.3 million, and it's not limited to first-time buyers, to everybody. Do you think, whether it's the Conservative or Liberals, do you think that's going to make a difference?
Yeah, I think it will, because once again, if you have a GST on a new home, let's say it's $1 million, that's 50,000. That's someone's down payment. If you have, like I said, even having people step in from a condo to, or you always said to a bigger single family home, like I said, that could be 65,000 if it's 1.3 million. So that's huge. Once again, it's reducing the barriers of entry into the housing market. And I think that's important. I think one of the areas is that we have to, as a country, examine why we put so much taxation on new construction and development. And like I said, if it's 30% of the cost, that's a significant cost.
And that's so my thoughts always with the Trent is totally, it's the cost. We've made the cost so expensive now. In my eyes, I could see two things from this. Builders could be like, okay, well, we're going to increase our price now because, hey, you don't have GST, which is that where like, I never know, should the federal government be able to step in and say, hey, like you've already been making your profit. Hey, you don't need to inflate it. We know during COVID, there was companies that they actually had no increased cost, but they're like, hey, people else are paying higher. I'm going to increase my prices. And that's hard because then we have, you could say, dictatorship. The government's now controlling everything. But I just find it gets scary of knowing like what the other people are actually going to do, even if they lower the development cost. Is it actually going to lower the price of homes? Or is the developer going to say, hey, I finally get to take some more profit from this?
Like anything, you got to trust in the free market, right? The
Yep.
free market will eventually find where it is based upon supply and demand. And in the end, governments, and maybe this is my philosophy, governments can only control so much. And in the end, I have put more faith in the market to determine what it is. And if you lower input costs, generally that will flow through to the consumers in the end. And that's how I said, and even when we look at some of the proposals where you want the government to build housing, I don't know if that's the right way because I have much more faith in the individuals building houses than the government contracting to build
Yeah,
houses.
that's I don't want the government giving out contracts in that way because it's there's we're gonna get to the Rivecan little
Mhm.
scam there
Mhm.
with millions of dollars going out.
Yeah, yeah, and once again, they said, uh, how many units? When you were talking about even building 500,000 for 35 billion, how many units are they going to be able to do and be cost effective? And are we going to do it as social housing? We've seen where in the past, whether it was Margaret Thatcher getting rid of the council housings or the project housings in the past, isn't it? I would think it would be better for governments to provide the tax rules and incentives to build housing versus building them themselves.
Yeah, we even have at our company we have a development company that we help with, and
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
actually submitted plans for like the new missing middle designs and everything. What
Yeah.
the government chose based on actual like affordability, worst designs in the world.
Hmm.
They're not cost effective. They're actually going to cost more money to build, and it's
Hmm.
just like where was the oversight on that? I don't even know if they actually confirm with construction people, hey, what's the most cost effective build?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I said, and it can be great intentions,
Yeah,
but usually the
Yeah,
market in
Alex and
the
I
end
have
will
mentioned in
determine what's the
previous
best
pods
choice.
that
totally.
really, in order for mass house building, is we need to create an environment that is inviting investment. So we've applauded Vaughan, Ontario,
Mhm.
where they are like, you know what, this space of increasing development fees from all municipalities, they've actually lowered development fees. We want to invite business back. We're going to make it cheaper to build. That's happening. And we've seen that in Alberta as well. Alberta is building more than the rest, like BC and Toronto, because they know you got to create an environment that invites investment. And how do you do that? You make the cost of building cheaper, lowering development costs. And municipalities really have to get on
Yeah.
board with this. They've just been drunk with the tax dollars over the last decade and a half. It's dried up. So they think that we're just going to increase it. No, take the Costco effect. If you want more volume, make it cheaper.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing too is it also very easy, or it's easier for municipalities to tax development because they don't get the same political pushback as if they raise property taxes. So if I can make it here where most people don't see it,
Yeah.
is a lot easier than saying, "Oh, your property taxes are going up 10% instead of 2%." And
Exactly.
so that's a lot of it too, is that politicians are always going to take the path of least resistance.
And that's what we compare to Canada and US. Everyone's, oh, your property taxes are so cheap. And I said, well, it comes, yes, our yearly might be cheaper, but it comes in other ways. Where like in the US, they don't have the land transfer tax and everything. And it's funny how everyone looks at it. They're like, oh, Canada's cheaper. It's, well, you're doing on one side, it might be cheaper, but it's more expensive on the other side.
I have a friend of mine who has a house in Mount Vernon, secondary house,
Yep.
and or just outside, and he pays over $10,000 a year in property tax.
Yep.
But in Washington State, there's no state income tax. So how does the state raise the revenue?
Yeah.
Government's got to raise it one
I
way or
had
the
a
other,
similar
right?
client
Totally.
How do
who
you
owns
plug
a
the
house
goods?
in Southern California. Property values is probably about the average home in in
Mhm.
Greater Vancouver, like the 1.8 range. Let's say in Vancouver, 1.8 property tax is what 7,000 to 8,000 a year. His property tax a year is 15 grand.
Yep.
Holy shit!
Yep. Yep. And
Yeah,
in his case, his tax is also very high too. And so
yeah.
he definitely, it's a negative that way. Well, let's go into some more here and let's see like what your thoughts are, like being in some of the parties there, Trenton. Like we obviously have some polls saying that Carney is ahead, while others have Polyev ahead. Like where are we actually meant to believe? Like these polls are just, I think they're crazy at this point.
polls are accurate for as of right now, but you got to remember too that in an election, only 60% of the people vote,
Yeah.
62%. So it's a question on which party has a better ground game, which party has the more committed supporters, and also will voters who take that information on the poll, will they adjust? So right now, Carney or the Liberals are benefiting that the NDP vote and the Bloc vote has, I wouldn't say collapsed, but they're dramatically down. If it looks like the Liberals are going to get a majority, will some of those voters go back and say, whoa, whoa, we don't want to give the Liberals unlimited power? That's going to be the interesting thing. I would say also in the polls that, like I said, the conservative voters are probably more committed. They tend to be, you can tell by the rallies. They're getting bigger rallies. Will their voters are probably more likely to go out and vote? Will the liberal votes see? That's going to be the interesting question, right? And I think a lot also depends on the regional. Right now, one of the interesting things I find about the polls is it's showing that the federal liberals are going to be roughly high 40s in Quebec. They have not been there since 1980. So the real question is Francophone Quebec all of a sudden switching away from the bloc in that?
Yeah.
That
So
remains to be seen, right?
And then one thing that I'll just go with this one, Alex. The one thing I've been seeing, and it's so in our area we have Trenton. Obviously this is where people like to dig up dirt on all the candidates.
Mhm.
Now, to me, it gets into a scary thing of obviously this is a conservative guy, and
Very good.
it's yeah. So you already know about it, and so that's where I didn't want to say his name, but it's a scary thing seeing some of that stuff. I myself, I actually forgot. I'm like, who's in my riding? Because I'm like, obviously I lean more towards conservative. I do, but I do have real life that I have to vote for the right person. Just because I want to party in does not mean I'm going to vote for a person that I do not agree with his stuff. And I think that's the scary thing for people with the conservatives is I think sometimes they get lumped in as these are the Trump supporters. And what is your thoughts on that? What's happening in that for that candidate?
Well, I think for him, of course, Aaron Gunn is a very forthright. He's done a lot of policy proposals and
Mhm.
that. I think he said there's two ways you can look at it there, right? Yeah, there's probably if you have opinions, sometimes there's going to be controversy, right?
Yep.
Is he going to be controversial in every issue? No. Is it better? So there's two ways you can look at. Do you want someone who just mouths all the political platitudes and doesn't have a stance,
Yep.
or thinks these things in private and doesn't mouth it? There's a lot of politicians like that. When you talk
So,
to them in there in person, they'll have a lot not different opinions, but they'll be more forthright because, like I said, they're not worried about who's looking over the shoulder. So I think there's that element that sometimes it's better to vote for someone who's genuine. And I think as much as I'm not a Trump supporter, that's with some of his appeal. I think the other thing too is also you got to look at that most MPs will have some influence, but they don't have it as dramatic. Politics in Canada is a team sport,
yeah.
and so just because generally the our party. I don't want to say discipline and loyalty, but it's pretty strong. So the party is going to come out with what they think is the best, and most of the MPs are going to have to toe the party line, and
Yeah.
that's both positive and negative on that. So, I said, I said I would, and I think I would. So, in my opinion, I would have someone on whichever side be more forthright and honest in their opinions than always mouth the politically correct things. But that's just me,
Oh,
right?
yeah, and that's I guess in that and we won't dive into it. Totally, yeah, and that's I mean I guess in that and we won't dive into it too much. You're trying obviously it's just the opinions like hey like I want people to have opinions about what is obviously there's certain ones that it's like hey like that probably something that doesn't need to be spouted on social media and that's where and yeah we won't dive too much into that.
yeah, like on that same token too, where we're talking about candidates, having dirt, we see on the liberal side with Paul Chang, making some joke in jest with Joe Tay about, you can hand him to the Chinese consulate and collect that bounty. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was a very poor remark there too, right? Where he said Canadians are already worried about foreign influence and a lot of his Chinese influence on our political process. And for someone to joke about turning in his political opponent to basically a political uh, not sentence, but a political process, that's a concern. I said I'm glad the Liberals got rid of him because I think that would have been untenable to keep him in. But it also shows that in politics you got to be very careful what you say, and that's I said for both good and ill. I said, and it's of course concerned that that someone he would even joke on something like that. I said, Paul, Mr. Tay, it's on the Hong Kong police radar because he's a democracy activist.
You were speaking on, the Chinese influence. There was a report that came out yesterday that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to sway Chinese Canadian voters by promoting Carney's strength against the U.S. Now, at the same token, all the mainstream media has twisted the words by saying targeted. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And the whole mainstream media, like, how do you make of it?
Well, the mainstream media is going to go where they get the eyeballs, right?
Yeah.
They're going to publish it the way that they get viewers,
Clicks.
right?
They want the clicks.
That's right. So if they can make it more controversial or more sensational, they're going to do that. So I always say the mainstream media is going to play their part, what benefits them, and so they're gonna try to build controversy and less boringness. So that's why even our mainstream media or politics, we always focus more on personalities than issues because
Now,
issues are not as politically
yeah.
sexy.
Now, Trenton, you've obviously been in politics here for a while. Obviously, you've seen it where social media wasn't even a thing. Do you find that I feel for us like it seems scarier now because I think there's so much information and data out there. Does it feel different for you from what it used to be in the past with just so much information being shared now?
I think it is because I think there's also a lot more opportunity for misinformation and
Yeah,
lies and rumors. Uh, Beforehand, when it was on, let's say, through a newspaper or through the TV, they had a higher standards. They had subject to libel
yeah,
and slander. The trouble is in social media, it's so easy for someone to have a bot account and say outrageous things and not have that accountability.
yeah,
And I think that's one of the difficulties we have is that just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true.
totally.
Doesn't mean it's faithful or factual. And that's, I think, the difficulty is how do you respond to that? And in also such volume. They said if you go on Twitter or sorry X or any social media or Facebook, there's no way you can respond all to that if you're a politician.
Yeah,
And that's also the difficulty is how do people where they get their information from? How do you make sure it is fairly factual? And that politicians are having a difficult
yeah.
time.
And I think, like you said, with news, I feel like even from when I used to watch the news as a kid when I was younger, I felt it was much better. They were able to break down, hey, this is this party, this is this. Now I just feel like one news channel's only pushing this side, other channels only pushing this side. There's no in the middle. And I feel like that's what Canada really needs is, hey, we're not left and right. Like we want to be in the middle.
It's also part of the trouble is that we as voters, if we always are going to go where it confirms our beliefs. That's
Yep.
just human nature. But democracy is much better when you have a debate of ideas and a debate
Yeah.
of issues. So I said it's always nice to say, oh yeah, people agree with us. But reality is that better decisions are made when you're challenged on that position. When you have to say, okay,
Yep.
how do we think? Oh, okay, there's that point of view, and I agree. That's one. I think we're better in Canada on that than the U.S. with the Fox Newses or the
Yep.
MSNBC. But yeah, we are falling into that trap that if someone watches CBC News, are they of that center left? Or if
Yep.
someone listens to Sun Media in Canada, are they center right? And they're not necessarily getting the debate that challenges their opinion. And
Totally.
I think ultimately that is better for us to make better decision making when we have people challenge and put different points of view.
So you kind of alluded to this earlier, Trenton, but some people have equated Pierre Poilievre as Canada's version of Donald Trump, whereas on the other token, people are saying that Mark Carney is basically an extension of Justin Trudeau, and he's just a global elitist because he's lived in three other countries, holds passport in three countries. And do you think that's a fair comparison amongst the two leaders? We're not going to talk about Jagmeet because we're pretty sure NDP is not going to win. It's going to be between Carney or Poilievre. Do you think that narrative that the public has, or like the sentiment, is that a fair picture to paint of the two leaders?
No, I don't think it's fair for either one, right? I think it's fair if you're a political partisan on the Conservatives. If you can tie Carney to Trudeau, that's your ticket. If you're a liberal, if you can tie Poilievre to Trump, that's your ticket, right? Whoever does a better job of comparing the current leaders to the unpopular leaders will win the election. But I think it realistically, any leader in Canada's got to be representative of their political reality here. Poilievre and Carney are going to act in Canadian interests. The Conservative Party in Canada is not the Republican Party in this. They're not necessarily. Conservatives believe in immigration, debate that challenges free trade, and they believe in balanced budgets. That is better. The Liberal Party under Carney is not, and he's probably going to move it somewhat to the more to the center. He'll still be a center left. He'll probably still believe in more status, more government expenditures, but they're going to have their own personalities and they're going to respond to the issues that they have there. So I think both parties. It's great from a political partisan because it makes their job easier. But the reality is both leaders or all parties are going to reflect what they think Canadians want.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Obviously, we can see Mark Carney has been taking a lot of things that the Conservatives have been talking about for months and months. And it's it's working great for them. There is no doubt about that. It's pretty funny to know where we were before in the polls, where the Conservatives were just destroying it. And now it's okay. Well, now the Liberals are talking more in the same sense. And it's interesting to see that.
And like I said, they're going to go where what they think will work and what Canadians want. The real question that I think as a voter you have to ask there is that no doubt Carney is a different leader than Trudeau, but does Carney still have a lot? He has campaigned in the past for carbon taxes.
Yeah.
He's even said that he's not going to even try to balance the budget over the next 3 years. He's saying I'll be more fiscally conservative, but he's not talking about trying to balance the budget over the next 3 years, at least. So the question is that what they say and what they actually, where their philosophy is there. I said, that's going to be. Yeah, there's no doubt Carney's taken, I said, he's not got rid of the carbon tax. He's basically reversed some of the capital gains. But these were things that the cap of today campaigned for, I said, 2 months. So you got to understand, people have to ask themselves, is this truly a change on the road to Damascus, or is this, like I said, political expediency?
Yeah. And that's, I guess the hardest thing is how do we keep these parties accountable? Let's talk about like Conservatives and that. It's great to say that they're telling us that they're going to do all these things. I find it the hardest thing is we can't even say, hey, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. There is no ramifications for them.
But that's where we as voters have to keep them accountable.
Yeah.
And how do we keep them accountable? Is we get involved, state our voice, right? B, if is that I don't want to say just protest, but you get involved, you press your issues. Like if a party's doing something that voters don't want, they should write their MLAs and MPs, right? They should visit because that will be the filter into the government. I know when you talk to MPs or MLAs, they know if they get a phone call, that represents 10 other people. If they get a letter, that represents 100 other people. And politicians are like anyone else. They worry about jobs and their jobs. And if there's an issue that they think is offside, it's amazing how they will go to where they think is onside. And we can complain that that's pandering and all that. But I always say to people, what's worse than representative government is dictatorship. They don't care and they don't matter. That's at least that's our checks and balances to get hopefully government that's better. I think, like I said, older people tend to be a bit more conservative. I think also, like I said, although I've seen other polls which show more young people are going to vote conservative than the older generation. So I think a lot will depend on people on voting for their interests. I think you'll find that people who are frustrated on housing tend to be younger people because they're worried that they'll never get into the market. And so whoever can capture on that cost of living I think will be more appealing to younger people. Older people tend to be, although they're very much worried about their pensions and how they're going to be able to sustain themselves, but they tend to have a lot more financial security, and that's part of the trouble. I think also when the political realities we have is as we develop a more division between those who own property and those who don't own property, that resentment is building.
Yeah,
People don't feel like they can get into the market,
yeah,
and so it's harder for them to say, okay, I'm going to work hard. Or a lot of people, a lot
yeah,
of young people have given up, and that's
yeah.
one of our big troubles, I think,
Yeah,
in our society.
totally. And from what I've seen for some of the older population, Trenton, is their biggest fear anytime like the politics are talked about is conservatives are going to bring the prices down. That is their fear, which I mean, it saddens me a little bit. Is obviously, hey, I understand they worked hard and they were able to buy homes, but they're so worried that if prices come down, where what about all the other people? I would rather I own homes. I don't want my prices to go down, but I would be perfectly fine if I lost value in my home, knowing that other people could then afford homes. And that's a big one.
I think that's where we have to look at is if we said supply. I
Yep.
think we have to look at how do we stabilize the price. We don't want to crash the market, but as Alex was saying, we've had increased immigration, population growth, dramatic. How do you build in the infrastructure and the supply to keep up with that?
Yep.
And so at least if we can stabilize the price, and people are going to jump on me and have inflation. So if we keep the prices stable, but have inflation go up 2-3%, well, over time, that will bring into like a real prices dropping. And I think that's probably the solution because you're right. If all of a sudden housing dropped by 20%, how many people are counting on the retirement on that? Or how many
Yep.
people would even be underwater? I said that's the concern. And then I said you're into I said that real economic crisis. One of the things as a side is if you looked at Japan, one of the big troubles they had where they've been stagnant for 20 years is
Yep.
because their real estate dropped. They had deflation,
Yep.
and people then don't spend. People don't invest because like I said, there's no rate of return, and we don't want a situation like that either. So how do you find that sweet spot?
Yeah, I know
That's
Japan too. The reason why they're in this current state is they allowed zero immigration, and especially with the birth rate being down, I believe across all the G7s, it's below 2, so it's below the replacement number of parents. So that's why their population is going down, alongside not opening their borders. I mean, the math is easy. It's like it's just going to decline, and I think we do need to have that right balance. Yes, we need to slow down immigration. We don't want it to be zero because our country is built on immigration. We are all immigrants at one point or another. Some have come sooner than others, right? It's funny you did touch on that. The older generation, we call them boomers, they tend to be more conservative in nature, but yet on the poll saying they're going to vote liberal because it's been good for them the last 10 years. But their beliefs are more conservative. So that's funny that you mentioned that, and that's kind of it's what serves me essentially.
also part of it is that it's Carney's, of course, 50, I think 59, and Polyev is 46. Polyev
Yep.
looks younger than he is. Carney probably looks a little bit older than what he is. And I think there's also that kind of subtle, well, maybe I can relate better here, relate better there, right?
Yep.
Well, like I said, it's going to be interesting. I think the debates are going to make a big difference. If anything's going to shake it out, it's going to be that. Like I said, even like I said, what will we, even the news over the next couple of weeks? Uh, Generally, the polls are saying if we focus more on Trump and tariffs, Carney wins. If we
Yep.
focus more on housing prices and cost of living, Polyev wins and the conservatives. And so the question is that where does the news, where does the which narrative wins out, is going to determine a lot of who does as well as they do. And that's going to be the interesting thing, because we have no idea what's going to happen down south in the border. I said, is it going to be tariffs today, no tariffs tomorrow, 15, 20, 40, 50? I said on that. And right now, in my opinion, Trump is Carney's wingman. Right?
That's yeah. I was going to ask you and it's funny because you would think a lot of the older population they're deathly scared of Trump, and so you would think some of that, but it seems to be more people are trusting in Carney at the moment of, hey, he's going to be a better control of these tariffs and stuff, and it's just interesting to see. Carney said, "Hey, we're done with the U.S.," and then the next day, Trump saying, "Hey, we're good buddies. I really like him. He's going to be the next prime minister." And it's just this is just pander.
Trump, remember, is, in my opinion, what a lot of Trump is doing is the shock and awe, the
Yep.
attention, and he loves tariffs. I think he truly believes in it. He believes they'll bring back manufacturing, and as a way he can get his budget cuts through what they call reconciliation in the states. But I also think a lot of it is because the U.S. law allows him, and this is dubious legally, under an emergency, to unilaterally impose tariffs. This way he can exercise his power and basically say, I'll put the tariffs on, or I'll take it off if you come to me and kiss the ring.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a lot of just purely power based situation, not economic.
Nope.
Purely said, I want people to grovel to me there.
Yeah.
And this is unusual. Politicians have egos like all of us. This is unusual to have someone so power hungry, power dramatic. I said, this is, most politicians try to hide it. They don't they don't tend to be quite as explicit as what Trump is. And I think that's a lot of it, is that he wants to exercise his power. He wants to show that he's powerful. He wants to feel important and whether it's good for the country or not. That's my humble opinion.
There was a thread I read on X a few days ago. It was an excellent commentary that Trump's idea behind the tariffs isn't like the main goal is to bring interest rates down in the states, because they have borrowed, I believe, what, $1.5 trillion, and based on current rates, the interest payments are, geez, like $500 billion or something like that. And the whole goal of the tariffs is to create shock in the system, like you said, create mass fear and uncertainty. And what mass fear and uncertainty does is it brings interest rates down, ultimately leading to cheaper deficit payments for the US. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take. Like, what do you think about that?
I actually think it's more that he wants its way of getting his tax cuts. He's already said he wants it in a hot pie in the sky, get rid of income tax. But if you look at it, in order to get anything passed in the states, they have to do a process what you call reconciliation, which gets around the 60-vote filibuster in the states, in the Senate. The Republicans only have 54 seats in the Senate. So what they have to do in order to do reconciliation, where the House and Senate has to pass the exact, they can't add to the deficit. So if he can theoretically bring $600 billion in tariff revenue and cut back $400 billion in Doge, he can then extend the Trump tax cuts. And whether that actually comes to fruition, of course, that remains to be seen. But that's what he's hoping to do, is to bring in the big tax cuts, which I think I read 87% would go to the top 1%, by taxing people on these tariffs and bringing in the tax cut. I think it's a lot more, that's what he wants, than anything else. That he'll say, look, we brought in this revenue here, because that's what Peter Navarro, which is one of his trade advisors, said. Oh, we'll get $600 billion in tariff revenue. I don't think that's realistic, because obviously you bring in tariffs, there's going to be less imports coming into the country. But I think that's what the game plan is.
That's it's so interesting, and that's where it's some sides is like people are now calling he doesn't even know what he's doing. It's, well, he has a plan. It's not like he's not just completely crazy, but I don't think he fully has realized what the fear is going on for people. And it's going to be interesting to see what, like, the Senate and all the people that work with them, they might be like, My party's now getting upset that I'm now with him.
And that's going to be the big pushback. Do the Republicans in the House and Senate take control back through the on the tariff policy? Because technically, or not technically, constitutionally,
Yeah.
tariffs are subject for Congress has the control on it. They have a control on taxation. So you've already seen one of the Republican congressmen, Bacon out of Nebraska, saying he's going to sponsor legislation. You've had Grassley, who is the longest serving Republican senator, going with Cantwell, the Democrat, saying we are going to take back that authority. Question is, apparently, I think already seven Republican senators are saying they'll sign on. They don't have maybe the 10 that they need, but are they going to get that amount of votes to take it back? And I think if Congress does, A, it's like anything, checks and balances are always way better.
Yeah.
But B, will that also be a shot across the bow to Trump saying, you don't have unlimited power.
Yeah.
We do have some authority. And I would think that it would make better decision making in the end. There's a reason why democracies tend to make better decisions than dictatorships.
Yeah, let's bring this back to Canada. Speaking of, in the States, we hear about swing states, right, during their election. Do we have any battleground ridings in Canada that could sway, in your opinion, like especially with your active involvement? What do you think our battleground ridings would be?
So in British Columbia is the Surreys, the Coquitlam's, the Maple Ridges there. So it's the outer suburbs. They go between the Conservatives and Liberals or NDP. And the question is that the NDP won 13 seats last election, or 14 seats, sorry, last election. Where do those NDP seats, are the incumbents able to hold on to, or do they go Liberal or they go Conservative? Federally, the biggest swing area is what we call the 905, which is the belt around Toronto. Whoever wins that will win the election. So the irony is, like in the last provincial election in Ontario, which they have basically similar ridings provincially and federally, Doug Ford won 78 seats of the 124. Right now, if you look at the tracking polls, they're saying the Liberals will win 80 seats of the 121. Basically, who wins the Bramptons, the Oakvilles, the Mississaugas, that belt will determine who's in power. And then the other interesting one is that in with the Bloc Quebecois being down, who wins what they call the 425, which is the area code around the island of Montreal? Does that go block, continue with the block, or does that swing to the Liberals? And those are going to be the areas to watch.
That's right. It always comes down to East. We could vote as much as we want, and which I understand people get frustrated with that, and that's where still our vote does still matter. But I do understand everyone's, oh, it's all conservative. Oh no, it's now changed.
Well, BC now has there's as many seats in BC and Alberta.
Yeah.
As there is in Quebec. And so, like I said, when you think over the 20 or 30 or 40 years, the West matters a lot more, right?
Yeah.
I said, but Ontario has 16.2 million.
Yeah.
They're going to be the vast majority, but it's whoever can win that 905, that way I said the kind of the suburbs, that's who's going to be prime minister.
Yeah.
And that's where the interesting thing, when you, like I said, you look at the Ontario PCs, they won it. Doug Ford was elected with a significant. Can the Conservatives break into that area, or does it stay with the Liberals?
Oh, this has been great. We're running short on time. Alex, do you want to ask the last question before we wrap up?
Yeah, obviously, I think this is the big one is like, what message do you have for voters who've never voted or weren't planning on voting? If you had to sell someone on like getting out there, Trenton, what would you say to them?
Well, politicians, even if you vote for a party that doesn't win, they look at the numbers. And I always say, make your voice heard. Just because you vote for a particular party or candidate this time doesn't mean you're going to give it forever. But make your voice heard. Politicians respond. And in democracy, I said, if you don't get involved, others will make the decisions, like I said. And that's one of the big troubles people have. It's easy to throw up your hands and say, oh, it's all, I can't do anything. But the reality is we have more power than we think. It's and so why wouldn't you exercise it? It doesn't take that long to vote, and they waited. Whether they win or lose, they look at the numbers. What percentage did we get in this riding? Which ridings were swing ridings? Which demographics vote? What are they interested in? They all look at that, and that has a lot more effect on the policy positions that the
Right.
government will take than we think.
Yeah, and like you said, the very first thing that you said, that Alex said, when you spend 50% of your income on taxes, why would you not want to have a way to spend? And that's just that's the easiest thing right there to tell someone.
Yeah, no, and government's a huge portion of our lives. Why would we have a say? I just don't, in my mind, why wouldn't you try to at least influence or at least put forward your opinions?
Folks, this has been great. Trenton, thanks so much for joining us. This has been Trenton Poy from Mountain View Insurance, political commentator. So, Trenton, we will have you back again sometime down the line. Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure, anytime.
Thanks a lot, Trenton.
Thanks for joining us. I do have to mention, if you're thinking about voting, just go out and vote. Your vote matters no matter what. Okay, let's exercise our Canadian right and privilege to vote and to vote who our next leader is. Folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, make sure to follow us. Please give us a 5-star rating. You can even send us an email because we want to know what you guys want to hear about. That's what we're here for. Reach out anytime.